please. Al, it's a great pleasure to be here with Rahul Gandhi and with a not quiet audience. I think we've already discovered a lively audience. And there's a lot to discuss. I'll just keep a vague eye on the time, including the most recent election. But I'd like to start, if I may, with a higher altitude perspective of how we got here. Situation where Modi's still got a third term in spite of having had his wings clipped. How did India reach this situation, the country of pluralism, secularism, your family's great role? What happened in the last 15 years to bring this about?
I mean, I think, first of all, of course, Mr. Modi has a central role in it. But I don't think it's only Mr. Modi. And I also don't think that it started in 2014. The general dynamics, the architecture and the forces that eventually got Mr. Modi are older. They just combined well in 2014. And I think India has had this fight. Modern India has had it embedded in it, the fight for and against the Constitution. And that's really the heart of it. The idea that all Indians should be equal, all Indians should be valued and treated in the same way versus a hierarchy. And the idea that, there is a hierarchy in India, a caste hierarchy, and that should be defended at all costs. So this is the conflict, and it's not a new conflict. I mean, if you go back in Indian history, you can go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, you'll see this conflict. And there it's a philosophical battle, and then it has its political structures. So
your family, I mean, I know everybody here will know, but it bears repeating. Your father was prime minister, your grandmother, Indira Gandhi, was prime minister, your great-grandfather, Jawaharlal Nehru, was leader of the independence movement and the first prime minister of post-colonial India, the greatest and the longest-serving prime minister. And your great-great-grandfather, Motilal Nehru, was obviously co-founder of Congress and therefore of the independence movement. There's nobody better than you. And looking back at your family history and at the sort of dramatic saga of India post-independence and pre-independence, to sort of stand back and ask, well, were there moments where, because your party was so much the natural party of government, that it became complacent, that it wittingly or unwittingly helped pave the way for this extraordinary period of Hindutva, which we'll get onto in a moment, may be receding, may or may not be receding, but is the self-analysis Congress should do, even now, to figure out how we got here?
No, look, politics ebbs and flows, right? And it's a contest, it's a competition, and you go up and down in that competition, and that's just part of it. I think the way I view it, that this has given us and the India Alliance as a whole a lot of space to think about how we go forward. I think the politics in India has fundamentally changed. And so from our perspective, what we see, and some people would agree and some people would disagree, but what we see is that there's a clash of visions. We don't agree with Mr. Modi's vision. We fight it. And for us, we are trying to now put in place the basic foundation, the basic building block of a new vision for the country. And the Congress party has periodically done this. It's not the Congress Party. I mean, if you look at the Congress Party and you compare it to other political parties, it has this ability to reinvent itself, right? So you look at the 70s, the Congress Party nationalizes the banks, and then it does a complete U-turn, in the 90s, and then is going with liberalization, with open economic architecture. So I think there's a design element in the Congress Party that has been put in place by Mahatma Gandhi, and it has certain qualities as a political organization which are very powerful. I mean, I was watching the elections, and there was a point in the elections when we sat down with our treasurer, and he was saying, look, the bank accounts are frozen. Now, how are you supposed to fight an election if your bank accounts are frozen? And so we were like, okay, we're done. That was the reaction, and we really didn't have an answer. But then the Congress Party fought an election with their bank accounts frozen, and has basically destroyed the idea of Modi, right? So it has, and you can see it because when you see the Prime Minister now in Parliament, and I come face to face with him, he's psychologically trapped, and he basically cannot come to terms. He cannot understand how this has happened, right? So it's, for me, sitting in the Congress Party and watching it is quite an amazing thing, because it's a political party, but then it's a whole set of ideas. And now looking back, I mean, I realized that the Congress Party fought the British Empire, and there's a reason the thing survived that, and it's in the basic architecture of the party. Now, sometimes the party goes away from that architecture. So I differentiate between the Congress idea, the Congress philosophy, value system, and the party organization. And they don't necessarily 100% overlap. But when they start coming close, then it starts to become very powerful.
Okay, let's get into the election. I mean, as you say, it was not fought on a level playing field. I think it's fair to observe with your frozen bank accounts, what's happened to my profession, the media in India, is quite dramatic. Restrictions. And of course, you had a prime minister who was expecting not just a hat trick, not just a third consecutive victory, but to lift his majority from what I think it was 303 he had in the last Lok Sabha out of 543, a clear majority, to 370 up to 400, a super majority. And in the event, gets 240. Now, with your bank accounts frozen and the media playing field not being level and all the rest, how do you explain this? Is this because you formed this India alliance and had essentially power sharing of who ran where? Is it because the fruits of growth really weren't trickling down to most Indians in what is objectively a very high growing economy? Or was it a more principled thing, backlash against Hindu nationalism? Was it all of these or something I haven't mentioned?
No, multiple things came together, right? So, for example, prior to the election, we kept stressing on the idea that the institutions have been captured. And whenever we'd go, India Alliance would go, we'd stress on this idea that, look, the institutions are captured and we don't have a fair playing field. The education system is captured by the RSS. The media system is captured. The investigative agencies are captured. And we kept saying this. And people were not quite getting it. And we would keep saying it again and again and again. And somehow they were just not getting it. And we couldn't understand why, because we were like, it's obvious to us, it's obvious to them, and something wasn't working. And then in one meeting, one of the people who works with us said, listen, try holding up the Constitution. And so I started holding up the Constitution. And everything we had said suddenly just exploded. So India realized in this election, and really, I mean, not to divide it so crudely, but poor India, disenfranchised India, oppressed India, that India, it understood that if the Constitution goes, the whole game is gone. And so that was the first sort of, I saw it, there was a shockwave, that when I would hold up the Constitution, it would go. Like I could see the shockwave going, that people are like, oh yeah. And then people started coming to me, when you're in these meetings, you'll start hearing from the sides that, they'll bring a constitution, or they'll start saying it. So what was very interesting to me was poor people deeply understood that now this was a fight between those who are protecting the Constitution and those who want to destroy it. So that was one very strong element. There was also the caste census issue that became big. And that's a fundamental question in India. Share, what you say in Hindi, bhagidari, of the institutions, the structure, the power of the Indian state. So these things suddenly started to come together. And at some level, I was frankly blown away by the wisdom of India. Like I would sometimes sit there and say, this is quite amazing, right? There was like a wall that suddenly arrived and said, okay, we are not backing down now. And really, I don't think the BJP, in a fair election, they were nowhere near 240 seats. No way. I mean, I'd be surprised if they had a financial, huge financial advantage. They had locked our bank accounts for one, but huge war chest. The election commission was doing what they wanted. I mean, the entire campaign was structured so Mr. Modi could, do his thing across the country. States where they were weak were designed differently than states where they were strong. So I don't view it as a free election at all. I view it as a rather controlled election.
What's your confidence? But clearly your goal now is to win the next election. And it struck me there's one of two ways, maybe both, that this could come about. One is that Modi is like, he's no longer godlike, as you say. He's sort of dented. He's down. He's not out, but he's down. Psychologically quite harmed, expecting this affirmation of his being above ordinary political mortals and not getting it. And that might lead to splits, infighting within the BJP. No, he's got no obvious successor, right?
My analysis is different.
Okay.
My sense halfway through the campaign was that Modi didn't think he was getting anywhere near 300, 400 seats. And I think early on he realized that this thing's going wrong, right? And we were getting inputs from the regular sources. Some of the intelligence agencies we were getting some of that information. It was pretty clear that they were in trouble. And so there was this internal thing going on in the prime minister that I could see. And psychologically, that how is this now happening? Because he's a person, as you know, he was in Gujarat many years, never faced political adversity, then Prime Minister of India, and suddenly this idea started to crack. And we knew when he said that, I speak directly to God, we knew that there had been that we had actually blown him apart, right? And that the psychology had gone. And so people think that, well, this was the Prime Minister sort of saying that, look, I'm special, I'm unique, and I talk to God. But that's not how we saw it. Internally, we saw it as a psychological collapse that, what's happened here? How is this thing not working? And it's not just the Prime Minister, it's deeper than that. So what has happened in India, and you'll see it, is that the coalition that brought Mr. Modi to power has collapsed. It's broken right down the middle, right? So you'll see in these elections that they will struggle. They will struggle, yeah. Because the basic idea that Mr. Modi is running a government for the people of India is gone. Now the idea has been replaced. 2-3 ideas have replaced it. Number one, that there is a huge nexus between the government and 2 or 3 really large businesses. 2, that the lower castes, particularly the OBCs and the Dalits, have been taken for a ride. And this is a very strong right across the board. And I mean, we poll it, we can see it.
You promised during the campaign a caste census so that you could then update the share of public sector jobs. Well, you could expand the share of public sector jobs reserved for lower castes.
See, there's the elephant in the room, right? Is when we talk about capture of institutions, when we talk about businesses, when we talk about the media, the elephant in the room is that 90% of India, OBCs, Dalits, Adivasis, they don't play the game. They're not even in the game, right? And that's really the elephant in the room. So the caste census is a simple exercise. And actually, it's more than the caste census. Caste census is one of 3 ideas. It's a simple exercise to say, okay, we've been, we got independence 1947. We've been going for a while now. Let's see how have the lower castes, backward castes, Dalits, how have they integrated into this system? What is it actually that they're participating in? And frankly, we've got the data. We've done our homework, we've got the data. And I can tell you, out of the top 200 businesses in India, right, there's almost no ownership of 90% of the population. I can tell you that in the highest courts of the country, there's almost no participation of 90% of India. I can tell you that in the media, national media, anchors, journalists, there is 0 participation of lower caste, OBCs, Dalits, Adivasis, right? So, and the people know this. It's not that this is not known. The large mass of people understand this, and they look at India and they say, okay, where is our participation? And the idea of the caste census is simple. We've not taken any policy position. We're just saying, look, we want to understand, we want a snapshot to understand where we at. What is the participation level of lower caste, Dalits, OBCs, poor general castes, right? And that's really the caste census. Now, there are 2 other components, which we've also said, but have not really been put out that much. One is the idea of a socio-economic survey. So we want to not only understand how many Dalits there are, how many OBCs there are, but we want to understand what their social position looks like, what their financial position looks like, what their economic position looks like. And the third component, which I think is very important, is we also want to understand, we want to take a look at India's institutions. We want to look at the media. We want to look at healthcare. We want to look at education, the owners, the structures that deliver these services. And we want to get a sense of what is India's participation in these institutions. So these are an institutional survey, a socio-economic survey, and a census.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't expand that to include the role of Muslims in modern?
They're included in that. It's
So
not
they're
just
included
Muslims.
in the OBC.
It's minorities.
category,
No, it's
minorities,
everybody.
Muslims.
It's
Okay.
even if you look at the general caste, you will find that there is a huge divide between poor general castes and well-off general castes, right? And that's the same for minorities. It's the same for Adivasis. It's the same for OBCs. It's the same for Dalits.
I mean, the reason I pressed you on that is because older people in this audience, and maybe some of the younger ones,